And also just to give folks a sense of the lay of the land as we get started, we've got our two postdocs and our visiting scholar here. Very excited to hear their presentations. Each of them are going to present their work for about 5 to 7 minutes, but then at the end of their presentation, they're going to have some slides that ask some particular discussion questions or ideas that we really want to get some engagement and interaction around. And so we've really tried to design this in a way to be as interactive, conversational as possible. So they really have the opportunity to engage with you all around their work and their ideas and what they've been learning. So we're trying to make it less of a monologue, more of a dialogue. And so really pleased to have a very engaged and interested audience here today. So for our presentations, we're going to go in first name alphabetical order. So we're going to start with Jessica Orth in just a moment, and then moving on to Jin-Young Jessica Kim, and then to Jennifer Kim, sorry. And then on to Johan Vegerberg to wrap that up as our last presenter. So really appreciate everybody making the time. We're so proud of the work that our postdocs and visiting scholars are doing here and eager to learn more about it today. So I'm going to turn it over to Jessica, who's going to make a brief presentation and then engage us all in some discussion and conversation. Jessica is now in her 3rd year of her postdoc and funded through a K99 award, so Pathway to Independence Award from National Institute on Aging.
Thank you, Bethany. It's great to be here with you all today. I know I met with Johan and Jennifer on Friday, and we're excited to present our work with you and share with you what we've been working on. So today I will talk about reflections on recent accomplishments and forecasted future steps to research independence. Before I do that, I would just like to give an overview of where I'm coming from. So I started working with Dr. John Cagle in 2020 on 50% of his Uplift project and 50% funded through the School of Social Work. And during the 50% of my training period, I applied for and received a K99 award through the National Institute on Aging. And so that started last August. And for the Uplift project, I worked with John as project coordinator, working on creating instrument guides and working on nursing home recruitment for his project. So I will talk about recent accomplishments, current activities, and my future plans. So as I mentioned, I started my K99 August 1st of 2023, and I was fortunate to begin K99 enrollment on March 20th. So that's when I got my first nursing home participant acknowledged, and I have a list of potential participants from 2 family members and 4 nursing staff as of 4/20, but on my way here, I got an email from another nursing home that they are interested in participating and will be sending me their participant lists in the near future. So that is very exciting to be in the recruitment and interviewing stage. I also submitted a systematic review and that was published on March 23rd. That is looking at the specialty care units in long-term care settings and what is special about those settings and special features of those settings. And I'm waiting for IRB approval for a supplementary study that I will talk about in the coming slides. So currently I am contacting nursing home administrators to promote participation in Project Glory. That stands for Good Life in Memory Care. And this is a project that asks a simple question: what makes a good day good for you? To nursing home residents and staff and their family members. But it's a question that often gets ignored as researchers generally focus on declines and deficits. But this is really focusing on strengths and resiliencies and how we can promote a good life among this population. And I'm also teaching social work 670 research methods to master's level social work students. And I'm also contacting nursing home administrators for information regarding dementia special care units. And this is the IRB that I'm waiting for. So this will be a study that examines the quality of the long-term care focus, which is a national data set of nursing home level information, and looking at what, how the information that says that they have a dementia special care unit, how that correlates with what the administrator says. So I was trying to define a definition of a dementia specialty care unit. And then I'm also excited to be analyzing clinical notes from the Uplift trial. So the Uplift trial is now in year 3, I believe. John will correct me if that is off. But we have lots of data, lots of palliative care notes that we have, and I have the opportunity to look at that and see how Uplift is impacting patient care. In the future, I will be conducting interviews for Project Glory. That will be phone-based interviews among nursing home residents with dementia, their family members, and nursing home staff providing their care. Again, contacting nursing home administrators for information regarding dementia specialty care units. In June, I will be doing a presentation at Academy Health for systematic review findings. And in the next year, I will also be applying for a tenure track research assistant professorship position. I have applied for 2 training programs this fall that will help me develop the next step. So I started the K99 phase, and I'll be transitioning into the R00 phase. These training programs will help me transition from R00 to R01. So they will help me develop my aims for the next set of things going on. And this one is through the Institute on Methods and Protocols for Advancement of Clinical Trials. This one is held in San Diego in August. And this one is the Dementia Palliative Care Clinical Trials Training Program. This one is more extensive. This one is a 10-month program with a 5-day intensive. And the idea is similar, to provide training for the next R1 stage. So that brings us to the discussion and advice. If you have any questions or comments or advice on my recent accomplishments, current activities, future plans, I don't know if we have students on or in, if they have questions about the postdoc process or applying or anything like that. I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
I'll just ask about your IRB process, just thinking about the complexity of working with individuals, collecting data from individuals who have maybe some cognitive impairments, of how that's been getting through IRB, how you've been thoughtful about collecting this information in a way that, you know, feels ethical and fair and is giving you the quality of the data that would be helpful for your work.
Yeah, thank you. We have a waiver of informed consent, and we will be asking family members to facilitate the phone call with the residents. So the family member will bring the resident on the phone, and then we will talk as much as we can with the resident with dementia, and family members may interject if it's necessary. And yes.
But really, the information you're getting will be just from the family member, or just from the patient, but also sometimes from the family member, or how will you think about distinguishing that, if at all, in your data?
So we have separate interview guides. One is for residents, and that it will be facilitated by the family member, but it's resident questions. And then on a separate interview, on a separate time, we will interview the family members. And then on a separate time, we will interview the staff. So we will have 3 perspectives on what makes a good day good.
For that particular individual, triangulating that?
Yes.
So good day good could depend on what time of the day you talk to them. Could change quite a bit. What strategies do you have to try to figure out? Do you have any kind of retest reliability, or are there certain times of day that people are more likely to say one thing than another? How are you dealing with the temporal aspects of dementia, because they're pretty intense?
Yes, thank you for that question. I am basing my work off of Laura Gitlin's Good Life model. And so that has 4 basic quadrants: psychological well-being and objective environment and the others are escaping me at this moment. But I'm basing it off of those 4 models, and I have randomized, so I've developed a list of prompts that I then randomize, that I will distribute to the questions in random order. So they won't be having the same questions in the same order. It's a random order to the questions that they will be asked.
But each person is just gonna answer those questions in one interview.
Yes.
Does it matter whether you have test, retest reliability? Does it? Or are you just trying to generate a set of as many ideas as you can?
Yeah, so the first aim is to conduct these interviews and really understand what is a good life. And then my second aim will be to work with stakeholders to develop a good life intervention. And then that will be implemented in the third aim of my K99, which is the R00 phase. And then hopefully the R01 phase would be a broader scale randomized clinical trial.
Yeah, I think building on that question, I'm thinking about like the sundowners idea of that later in the day, there's maybe more cognitive decline or challenges with answering questions. Are you thinking about trying to make them all earlier in the day, or is there a variation or just convenience of when it can be done?
This will be on convenience of when it will be done, but I will definitely be mindful of the sundowning and the different temporal aspects of dementia in interpreting the results.
It's so complex to plan a project.
Love the question.
Can I ask like a number basic question? So I was very excited when you got to work, congratulations, because you're our first kangaroo, which I just like to say. And we were thrilled that we haven't had a lot of people get these kind of phased awards before. Any tidbits or, like what lessons learned from submitting this particular award and also submitting I'm really interested in these, because I just applied for one, a phased award, like anything that you learned from reviews or from the process of submitting.
Thank you. I attended the training workshops put on by the School of Medicine, and I had my dissertation, and I had unanswered questions from there that were just eating at me. So I had an idea that I was going with, so I worked on developing my aims during those workshops, and that really helped walk you through all the aspects of the different patient materials and gave advice on that. There are also on the NIH reporter website, there are examples of other K99 awards and things like that I took a look at, and worked with Dr. Cagle extensively on developing this and forming the committee, and really appreciative of his guidance.
Thanks.
And you're still in the K stage until you get your next position, right? Is that when they switch the Argos or?
So the K99 is for 2 years, so August 1 of this year to July 30th of 2024. And then at that point, I will need to have obtained a research professorship. Okay.
Faculty job.
Yeah, faculty job.
Yeah.
Yes, at that time. And then, so the R00 phase is dependent on successful completion of the K99 phase.
And does that have to be at a different institution or just not within the School of Social Work, or are there limits to what that?
Yes, so this is a Pathway to Independence award, so they really want you to be independent, so I will be stepping aside from the School of Social Work to do that work.
But you could stay at the university, like if you got hired by a School of Nursing or something, would that count, or is that?
I believe that would count.
Some sense of how these awards work.
It looks like Dr. Cagle had.
Ah, yes, Dr. Cagle, Mentor Cagle.
Hello. Thank you, Jessica. I just wanted to respond to some of the inquiries about the K99. I do think that NIA in particular, and maybe NIH in general, that they are interested in developing independent scientists who are pursuing understanding and promoting mechanisms of change, so really interventionist. And so if anyone is developing K99 or some kind of phased award type mechanism, they probably want to think about how their work fits in with that priority. The idea that we want to understand how to make things better through interventions. And so I think that was a strong piece of Jessica's application, was that she was really taking this good life model and trying to empirically understand the mechanisms that are associated with promoting a good life in these specialty care units, so that she could then in her 00 phase do a pilot intervention to see if she could improve outcomes. And so I think that's why they were really excited about it. And it's pretty cool to see this work come to fruition. So thank you for the presentation, Jessica.
Yes, thank you.
Any other final questions for Jessica before we switch presenters?
Or any any advice on going to the next stage? I applied for a faculty position. Does anyone have some input on that?
And you're thinking pretty broadly for disciplines, or I know you're not a social worker by training, or are you thinking about your identity as a scholar?
Yes, my PhD is in health services research and policy. And I would like to keep it in the social work, health services, public health. That's 3 broad areas, but within that area.
Probably not the only one thinking, well, we've already done what we would suggest, which is get a funded staged research project so you're carrying money with you to your next job.
Yeah, you should be very competitive, I would imagine. I don't know that field completely outside of the social work problem, but it seems like that would be great experiences.
Yeah, Jessica, this was great. Thank you for the presentation. And I think showing, the strategies that you shared about thinking for your career trajectory is going to be really great in terms of your next steps, and also being able to work in different disciplines, as you just named, social work and public health. I think that's a real benefit and strength that you've already been multidisciplinary and multidisciplinary research, and that's a great setup to be open for that. I don't have any specific advice so for going into some of those different areas, but you look impressive to all of us.
Well, thank you.
The only other thing I would say is, I know at UMB, we've been working with nursing homes all across the country for many years. And if you're gonna move to another area, it might be good to show that your work and your ability to engage goes beyond, this local community, and figure out how to engage and make your work relevant to where they.
And for John's Uplift project, we're working with nursing homes in Indiana and Maryland, but for my project, it's a national search. So I have one confirmed from Wisconsin, and I'm waiting on some in California, Utah, Arizona. So this it's going to be a national reach.
Making it hard for us to give you advice.
Well, great to learn more about your work and the stage of your project. So thanks so much for sharing that. Great to get caught up on that. Our next presenter is going to be Jennifer Kim, who has just joined us back in September, I think, or late August, to work with Dr. Hakshin on one of her projects and to build her skills in her first year here of a postdoc.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jinyoung Jennifer Kim, a postdoc working with Dr. An at University of Maryland School of Social Work. And today I'll be presenting child maltreatment poverty research with two of the main questions that I would like to address is what do we know so far in this research area and what steps should we take to move forward? Okay, table of contents. So I will be presenting one of the manuscripts that Yunji, Dr. An, and I have worked on last semester, and this manuscript is currently under review. It's called Poverty and Child Maltreatment, a Systematic Review, and I'll briefly go over the research purpose, methods, and findings, and then proceed to the discussion questions. So the research purpose was to synthesize the existing literature regarding the causal relationship between individual level and household level income and child maltreatment in the United States, and to put that into a question format, what is the relationship between individual level or household level poverty and child maltreatment? And to address that research question, so I can read.
Yes.
Slide. So this is the search strategy that the team has come up with and implemented in our systematic review. First, the time frame was set from January 1st, 2000 to August 31st, 2022. And a total of 6 databases were used to retrieve relevant research articles that we'll be using for this systematic review. And for the search terms, there were 2 topic-related keywords. First, the child maltreatment-related keywords, and second, poverty-related keywords. And using these 2 sets of topic-related keywords, we created several sets of Boolean combinations and then used that in each of the databases. Okay. So as a result, we were able to import a total of 4,701 records into the tool called Covidence. And using the 6 inclusion criteria and 10 exclusion criteria, we systematically screened in and screened out certain articles. And at last, we were able to narrow down the total records into 27 studies for the final analysis.
Did Covidence create this Prisma?
Yes,
Wow.
you can download it. So I will now go over some of the major findings for this systematic review. First, the measurement tool for poverty. Of this 27 articles that were selected, 63% of them assess poverty using individual or household income. And this income indicator was again subdivided into 2 categories. First, general individual or household income. And by that means the respondents would be asked to write down what their monthly or yearly income is. And that was about 40.7%. And another 22.2% measured poverty using household income based on poverty threshold or federal poverty guideline that will be announced and released by the government on a yearly basis. And I also tried to group these articles into several combinations that's indicated in the table. So about 40.7% of the studies measured poverty using only income indicator, 18.5% used to measure poverty with only the receipt of welfare benefits. And I believe that third one is 22.2%, but I will have to double check. Okay, yeah, I'm right. Okay. Okay, so about 22.2% of the studies use the combination of both income and welfare benefits to measure poverty. And lastly, 18.5% of the studies use more than 2 welfare benefits to assess poverty. And the type of welfare benefits that were mentioned in these studies are listed in the table.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
In NSCAW, they ask parents about their income. How rare or common is that these are self-reported from parents?
I think I can answer that by using the information on the next slide.
Okay.
Yeah, because some of the this is a little bit different from the income, but based on my understanding, most of the income indicator was self-reported. It was not the administrative data, so it was purely, I guess,
Generally
subjective.
accepted,
Mhm. And moving on, the measurement tool for child maltreatment, well, more than half of the studies, 71.9% of the studies use administrative data to measure child maltreatment. And those data would include number of CPS investigation or referrals, substantiated reports, screening reports, etc. However, there were also about 28.1% of the studies that use scale to measure the extent of child maltreatment or the incidence of child maltreatment. And some of the scales that were used include parent-child conflict tactics scale, conflict tactics scales, and development history questionnaire. Now, the type of maltreatment. The type of maltreatment actually varied across studies, but I tried to kind of make the patterns. So these are the lists that I have come up with. So first, 18.5% of the studies did not specify the type of maltreatment. Rather, they would simply describe child maltreatment as child abuse and neglect. However, there were another 18.5% of the studies that would classify child maltreatment into 4 types: physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect. And another 18.5% would define child maltreatment as physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, and all the other. And there were also a number of studies, about 14.8%, that would primarily focus on neglect in their studies. 11.1% would concentrate only on physical abuse, and 7.4% on physical abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect, and 7.4% on physical abuse and neglect, and lastly, 3.7% on physical abuse and emotional abuse. This slide is like the core findings of this systematic review, because our aim was to, examine or identify the patterns of association between poverty and child maltreatment. And if you see the first row, a vast majority of the studies reported a negative association between income and child maltreatment. And these studies would lead to either of these 2 conclusions or interpretations. First, higher income decreased the risk of child maltreatment. And second, family living in poverty had a higher risk of child maltreatment. But these 2 lines are phrased differently, but they're essentially talking about the same outcome. And moving on, there was a relatively small portion of the studies that reported a positive association between income and child maltreatment. And these studies claim that the higher income increased the likelihood of physical maltreatment or CPS investigation. And with regards to welfare benefits, it showed mixed results. For example, 14.6% of the studies indicated that there is a negative association between welfare benefits and child maltreatment. And the type of welfare benefits that would result in negative association was Medicaid, 7.3%, and TANF, 7.3%. At the same time, there were about an equal portion of the studies that would demonstrate a positive association between welfare benefits and child maltreatment, and that was about 12.1%. And those welfare benefits that result in a positive association was childcare subsidy, 7.3%, and food stamp, 4.8%. However, there were also studies and outcomes that found no significant association between income, welfare benefits, and child maltreatment, and I believe that was 37%. But as you can see in the table, the percentage does not add up to 100 because, as I explained earlier in the previous slide, there were some studies that would measure poverty using more than 2 welfare benefits, or they would use both income and welfare benefits. So those studies would report more than 1 outcomes. And that is why the percentage does not add up to 100. Okay, So based on the research that I just presented, I came up with 4 discussion questions that I think might be interesting to all of you who's attending the seminar today. So the first one is, other than the income, what do you think we should be considering when defining poverty? And what are the limitations of the money metric approach to identifying poor or low income families? And second, what would be the pros and cons of using scales to assess child maltreatment, for example, the parent-child conflict tactic scales? And do you think these tools are effective in capturing child maltreatment incidents? And third, we used the family stress model of economic hardship as a way to explain the mechanism between income welfare benefits and child maltreatment, but I believe there are other conceptual models and theories that we can possibly use to explain this association. So what will be your own interpretation of these results? And lastly, I'll have to move this again, I'm sorry. There were mixed results regarding the effect of welfare benefits on child maltreatment. Yeah, but I remember the questions. I was just.
Maybe just top one.
I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Oh. Okay, so yeah, what do you think may have caused such inconsistency? So those are the 4 questions that I thought it would be interesting to discuss with the group. However, I'm not sure if we will have time to go over all the questions. So if there is any questions that you would like to discuss with the audience here, please raise your hand or turn on your microphone, just speak. And that'll be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
So can you go back to the prior slide?
Sure.
Because the findings are really interesting. I feel like there's a lot to sort of untangle there. And so just trying to think through, because it looks like what you're capturing is just sort of the association, but I'm also thinking about effect size.
Mm-hmm.
And so thinking about where there might be stronger or weaker effects in that association. I don't know if you've gotten to that stage of the analysis yet.
That would have to require me to do a meta-analysis, but I think one of the major challenges of doing a meta-analysis is that they would have to report the same coefficient. For example, all the studies have to report, for example, beta or odds ratio in order for them to be included in the meta-analysis. So if I have 27 studies included for the systematic review, and if only, for example, like 5 studies reported the same coefficient, like the same value as to beta or odds ratio, then that will be the ones that we can analyze. So I could perform meta-analysis. I haven't thought about it when I started this research, but I could definitely perform meta-analysis and, like you said, compare the effect sizes of the associations. That is totally possible. I just haven't gotten to that.
So I do think there's some good news there too, of that there's so many now effect size calculators that can standardize to the Cohen's D or the Hedges G, and so as long as there's some sort of effect size or information available, even if it's mean and standard deviation, you can calculate that. And so there is a little bit more, I think, leeway with the development of some of those standardizing tools to aggregate differences. And I think we can argue whether those are really comparable, but I think there are some more ways to think about that, just because I feel like 3 and 4 are so contradictory, and I think that those are also very politically charged kinds of statements. And so I think I'd want to really explore that and understand that to figure out what's happening there, that you could have the opposite findings.
I've seen some results of, I don't remember where, studies that showed that wasn't so much whether you were on Medicaid or whether you were on TANF at the moment that had to do with child maltreatment, but whether you've been going on and off. So a family that's more disorganized may not be on TANF, may not be on AFTC, because at that moment they're, in the US, we try to push everybody off these programs instead of trying to keep them on. That's how it works. So I don't know whether it's possible to, whether there are studies that look at lifetime use or number of spells on and off Medicaid or TANF, but that's something. That's-
Dr. Taylor has his hand up also.
Oh, okay, we'll go to Dr. An and then Dr. Cagle, I think you said.
So, yeah, that that's really good point. So when we started this study, and now the Children's Bureau is looking at the policy, those policy imaging policies, such as Medicaid, they're looking at as preventive services. So after when they first acted, there were so many interventions, it was in it's more practice interventions, but now they are extending those preventive services concept to those policies. So this is into this system review and see on the studies what's going on so far. And the next stage of the research will be looking at the fragile benefits data, which is enforcement data, and then there are variables of they are getting those benefits of payment during there. And then there was a report of CPS environment. So we are looking at they receive the benefit of CPS environment, and then what's the next. So that is our next stage of the research. And also it is great that Dr. Kim has been doing this in addition to her regular support and the research activity supporting the CFSR and all the data analysis and the surveys and the focus groups. And in addition to those, all the full-time project work, she has been putting extra effort to further explore this.
You're a hard master, Huxley.
Dr. Cagle, you've got a question?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. This is very nice and very interesting. I was curious if you looked at the quality of the studies providing the findings that you're presenting here. You know, differences in sample size, for example, could help. You know, if it's a small study, that might explain why we're seeing no association in some studies. Or, you know, are they longitudinal versus cross-sectional, or are they intervention studies? I wonder if you looked at those kind of rigor pieces when evaluating the findings from these different studies. Thank you.
Yes, I did before we went on to the analysis stage. We did use what's called NIH quality assurance tool, I believe. We use that, and then we assess the overall quality of all the studies that were included in the final analysis, and that resulted in the overall quality of the studies included as good. So we did not exclude any studies because that all the studies met the requirements that was indicated in that criteria. And like you said, I believe there. Yes, I think when we interpret those results, we really need to take it into account the sample size, because, well, based on the sample size, some studies would yield that, you know, it is significant, but if you have a relatively small sample size, that might lead to a biased result. So I think that is definitely something that we need to consider when we interpret that results in the discussion section. And I believe we did that. I just didn't include that slide for today's presentation because we had a limited time to present all the materials. Yes, thank you.
Sure, thanks for sharing.
Any other questions? Erica, Dr. Lewis.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. This is a wonderful presentation. I did have a question about, I think it's numbers 3 and 4, and wondered your thoughts on if we were to disentangle child maltreatment, so abuse from neglect, if you think that that would change the associations to these benefits, such as Medicaid and WIC and food stamp.
Dr. Lewis is here to ask the tough questions.
Oh, so real, like, do you think, just personally, do you think that maybe there would, if it was just neglect, that it would be, that there would be a negative association between neglect and child maltreatment versus physical abuse and child maltreatment? Oh, excuse me, physical abuse and those.
I believe so, because currently I'm working on this research that seeks to examine the relationship between the objective and subjective poverty and the different types of child maltreatment. I think there were 3 types that we're focusing on: psychological aggression, physical child maltreatment, and neglect. And that I haven't finalized the results yet, but that showed us that depending on the type of child maltreatment, the outcomes kind of varied. So based on that results, I believe it could change if we only focus on certain types of abuse or neglect. I think that could definitely change the overall association. But I will look it up. I think that's a very interesting point. So I will look at that. I would look back at my table and try to figure out if that is something that really makes sense. Yeah, I will definitely go back and try to look for that pattern. And if there is a pattern that we can talk about, I'll address that in the discussion. Thank you. That's a great
That's
idea.
great. Thank you.
Yeah, because that does seem to be a sort of hot topic right now on the child welfare listserv. I think Dr. Barth weighed in on that, of this idea of what we call maltreatment, child maltreatment as a bigger umbrella, has maybe really distinct classes within that around poverty-related issues around neglect versus physical abuse. And so thinking about when we put that all under the same umbrella, does that explain maybe some of these kinds of different findings, and using more nuanced language maybe helps to create some new knowledge. So thanks for raising that. Good idea.
So just one thing, Yang Feng Xu, who's one of our alums, and I have a paper in press now that tries to disentangle poverty and adverse life experiences in terms of kids who, it's an NSCAW study, kids who came into the study at home, and then within 3 years, the kids had gone into out-of-home care. So things got worse. And whether what was more explanatory, and it's not a perfect study by any means, but in our findings, at least, it's clear that it's adverse experiences. It's getting arrested, it's problems with substance abuse, problems with intimate partner violence, problems with housing. And of course, those things are somewhat related to being poor, but being poor itself wasn't really the determinant. The outcome wasn't child maltreatment, though. It was placement in the out-of-home care. So it's a separate category. So I should send you that paper.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you.
Paul?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I mean, I'm a naive listener here today. I mean, it kind of reminds me of, this is the challenge, I think, around welfare benefits, because I think about it like antidepressants. Like antidepressants are associated with suicide, but they're also associated with getting treatment for depression, right? So what I think about in terms of anti-poverty programs is they may help, but then they also mark individuals who are more vulnerable for at least child neglect from what we're talking about. What it makes me think about is, I'm not saying you should have done this or you should do this, but just thinking about like Rod's work and like are there within subject designs out there that look at long-term family, like when people are on benefits, within that family, does reporting risk go down? Because then it helps you to deal with this issue of like comparing people on benefits, comparing people not on benefits, or things like, the other thing like you hear about these programs where people are randomly assigned to receive extra money. So then like just getting extra, so if poverty is a marker, then I guess getting extra money could be like an experimental intervention. Does that make people less likely to be reported?
Is that your policy question? I guess I wasn't really quite clear what you were trying to learn from this. I mean, what's your hope that your findings will tell you we could do or not do?
Well, I guess one of the hopes that we were trying to look for is more like, I guess by putting the keywords that are that were like, like the poverty related keywords such as the Medicaid, TANF, childcare subsidy, or food stamp. We were trying to see which of those welfare benefits are really helping or really effective in reducing child maltreatment. But the out of the 4,701 records, we were only able to narrow down to only 27. I don't think that's a substantial amount of records for us to lead to that conclusion. So I guess we still need to, gather more information to reach to a conclusion or to the level that we wanted it to be. So hopefully this could be like the grounding work to start with, and then later on we can accumulate more data, and then reach that conclusion that we were hoping to get to.
So in the long term, family child workship. Separately, we made at this point, like the beneficiaries' information is separate, so data is separate. So we have mind like data system and the supporting system, we can support the family in whole, not the child market support or cashier systems. Also, from the Department of Social Services, from our systems of work, we have a lot of workers like willing to work together. We're willing to work. However, the communication itself and the administrative data itself is a separate.
Put it together for us.
Right. Excellent. So I see there's a bunch of comments in the chat. Are you able to click on that to see if we can see? Okay, great. Just lots of kudos, so that's wonderful.
Any questions that we missed?
Excellent. Right, so we'll turn it over to Johan Fagerberg, visiting us from Uppsala University, finishing up his PhD dissertation work. So he is currently in his 5th year, I think, in the program there, and has collected a whole bunch of data that he has been analyzing during his visit here. He joined us back in January and is here through the 4th of July, so we're enjoying having him while he's here. If you go down to share screen, it will come up. I think it might have been open.
You can't open the PPT first. I think they have.
So yeah, hi everyone. My name is Johan Fagerberg. I'm a PhD candidate at Uppsala University in Sweden, and I will talk about my PhD project that is about how social work students form a professional identity. And the title of this presentation is On the Right Foot, Investigating Social Work Students' Footings Towards a Professional Identity. I think will entail some monologue, unfortunately. So the research aim has been to investigate social work students' formation of a professional identity. So with identity, I mean something that answers the questions, who am I and how should I act? So it gives a sense of self, but also provides guidelines for action and how to act. And I distinguish between a personal and a collective professional identity. So with a personal professional identity, I mean how individuals think of themselves as professionals and how they relate to their profession. And with a collective professional identity, I mean that members of a profession recognize each other as a group, and that they use this identity to mobilize in accordance with their common views. And in this presentation, I will focus on the student's personal professional identity. And I have used an ethnographic approach. I have done participant observation with a group of bachelor social work students on campus and on Zoom during COVID restrictions. And I have also done interviews with 8 of these students on 3 separate locations. So in Sweden, the social work education leads to a bachelor degree and it stretches over 3.5 years. So I use the concept of identity work, which I define as how individuals construct and perform personal identities that are congruent with social/collective identities on the one hand and their self-concepts on the other. So it's captures how identity is constructed through a tension between like individual agency and external expectations. Then I use the concept of footings to distinguish between different types of identity work. And this can be defined as so how students relate to or approach the identity of social worker and how they express this through their self-presentation. And in the thesis, I try to illustrate how students shift between 3 types of footings or ways to relating to their professional identity, which are called exploration, distancing, and embracement. So now I will try to illustrate these 3 footings with examples from my empirical material. And the first example is what I call role exploration. So the explorative footing is some taken in situations where the social worker identity is perceived as uncertain or obscure in the eyes of the students. So this is a tentative approach where students gradually adjust to and adjust to the identity and learn it. So with role exploration, I mean how students like explore the different roles that come with the professional identity of a social worker. So one example of this is that as their training takes place within a university, they must learn to enact the role of a student. So this is a field note from the very beginning of the education, which illustrates this. So I will read this field note. During the break, I approached Henrik. He said he was tense, having difficulties getting everything to work. It's so much until everything falls into place, he told me. I sat with the assignment earlier, but I had a breakdown and called Roland, the teacher, and asked, what the heck are we supposed to do, sort of. So this field note illustrates that students need to decode the instructions for assignments and teachers' expectations, and also how the university works as an organization. And this can require some effort on behalf of the students. And this example is about role embracement. Yeah, so with embracement, I mean that students are committed to and that they have the skills to perform a certain role. And I argue in the thesis that students are trained to take on the role as street-level bureaucrats. And so street-level bureaucrats means that they will encounter many different kinds of situations and problems, and that they cannot rely solely on organizational guidelines to address these situations. And they need to handle some amount of uncertainty in their work. So this is from an interview with a student that did her field placement as a psychiatry social worker. The problems you encounter on your field placement, how would you explain them? I asked her. Problems. Well, I would say that there are certain organizational issues that we lack directives for what do we do in this particular situation. But that might be because the unit has only existed for 3 years. But I've also concluded that it doesn't matter how long it has existed because it's so complex what we deal with here that it doesn't matter how many directives you got. So while she sees a need for more guidelines, she also has come to accept and feel comfortable that she needs to handle this uncertainty that comes with being a street-level bureaucrat. And the last example is what I call knowledge distancing. So the distancing pudding is taken in situations where the student did not feel that the collective identity of social work aligned with their sense of self. So knowledge distancing means that they distance themselves from different types of knowledge that they were expected to learn. And this is from an interview with a student that did her field placement within the what's it's called, the senior care services. I asked her, what has been least useful from the education? Well, since I haven't used anything, there's really not so much that has been useful. But you still think that you use certain things, like implicitly, would you say so? Yeah, but I don't know if it's necessarily things from the education. I think it's rather common sense, you know, your approach, how you talk with people. My experience is that in practice, in the real world, you don't use, at least not where I have been doing placement, theories and methods the way it's described in school. So I mean that the student here distances herself from what I call formal knowledge of social work, which is the knowledge that is codified and abstract and developed within academic disciplines like social work. And instead she leans towards what can be called practical knowledge, consisting of what she says is common sense and social skills, for example. Yeah, these were my 3 examples. And I have some like points for discussion and feedback. So do you see any similarities with or differences from experiences of becoming a social worker in a US context, for example, in regards to how to handle uncertainty and use of knowledge? And like as I writing up my dissertation, do you see any central points for me to elaborate on in the discussion section of the dissertation? For example, implications for social work, education and practice, and then other feedback comments.
I wonder if there maybe is a question in that chat. See that one, but if you just somebody saying, oh, you go down. Dean Lenning had to leave early. I was curious on her thoughts of this, because I do think there are some overlap to our students of some of that, Dr. Sacco's nodding as well, that dealing with that uncertainty and managing that feeling of you're going into a situation and don't have all the answers and tools that you feel like you need, and how students express that in these comments. Yeah, I think that's something that we see with our students here, so that master's level.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on a lot of universals, at least in terms of clinical practice and training. You know, Dr. Greif, who's been here a long time, talks about, like, you know, being uncomfortable, being uncomfortable. And I think training students in the tolerance for uncertainty is part of what we try to do. If you could help me in this area, though, the distancing from knowledge resonated with me in a powerful way. Do a lot of training with people that are in recovery from substance use disorders. I think one challenge is that when people have powerful and positive life transformational experiences, the tendency is potentially to overvalue those experiences. So like, oh, this happened to me. You know, now I'm going to help other people by telling them about my experience. It's not completely invalid, but it can sometimes become a barrier to other forms of learning. Like some students we have are just things do not, you know what I mean? Like they don't stick in the same way. In some ways, because of that, they have this kind of really powerful life experience that affects their ability to kind of hear other things. So it's fascinating to hear that things are not that much different. It's not.
I think one of the other things that is part of becoming a professional is realizing how these interventions, although we talk about them as like 12-week, 16-week interventions, that they're just a tiny slice of time in people's lives. And that, you know, even if you do great work for a short period of time like that, and that's often what our students field placement, that's all it is, you're not going to see a lot of transformation. You're going to hope that it builds on something before and that it unlocks something subsequent, but for students who are hoping to see that their knowledge that they've learned, even if they do apply it, isn't leading to transformation, that's an adjustment as well.
You don't see it because it's.
Just as we don't seem to transform our students that fast either. We hope that things will make a difference in the, after a while.
Yeah.
That's why we love our PhD students, because they stick around. Thanks, Susan.
Any comments from the virtual audience? We're not able to see you all. Ah, John Cagle, thank you. Same question. Politicization of social work, how that impacts professional identity. You want to say more? What you mean?
Yeah, I don't know if maybe I'm just becoming more sensitive to it as I mature, but I'm starting to see how our profession is often politicized by others, and some see social work as incredibly left-leaning, in that, you know, we might not be able to provide good support and care for people who have differing beliefs, different orientations. And I was wondering how that both affects practice and our own sense of identity. That's all.
Yeah, I'd be curious, is that an issue in Sweden? Is that something that social work is seen as very left-leaning, or, I mean, you have a very different social welfare state?
Yeah, I mean, now I think it's more, the debate is more like how the relations between politics and social work education, for example, because the government now wants to like interfere with what we're gonna teach students, and like lean the education towards problems that are on the agenda at the moment in a political debate and so on. So in that way, I think, I mean, the education in Sweden is more about like keeping, like those political views like outside, and be able to like regulate ourselves what we're gonna teach to students and so on. But I mean, then of course some like values are transferred to students, I would say, from like my observations of this group of students, which I think is quite, I would think it's quite generalizable to other educations as well. But I mean, that is about like protecting, I mean, clients from too rigid like procedures from the organizations, and of course, I mean, to stand for like social justice and so on. So I think that is perceived as a good thing. Those values, or the ideology of social work.
Thank you for your response.
Here's about your methods of, I know I've got a number of doctoral students here, and we don't very often have ethnographic dissertations. And so you did a number of different things to try to understand this concept. So just sort of your thoughts on what was most helpful. I mean, was it the prolonged engagement of multiple semester of tracking folks, the interviews? Do you think you got more depth because of the amount of time spent, or being able to observe phenomena to understand, contextualize, or talk us through sort of how you'd weigh some of those methods? Because I know you spent a lot of time.
Yeah, I did spend a lot of time, but still I think maybe this is like inherent in ethnography, that you always want to do more of it. Like and immerse yourself more, because in a way I think that I wasn't able to do that because of the COVID pandemic broke out like in the beginning of my fieldwork and so on, and I mean, and I could only follow the students like on Zoom seminars and so on, and it doesn't really give the same like immersement in the in the field. So yeah, I would have liked to like be with the students more on a daily basis, I think, within the school. I've done that to some degree. And then I think, I mean, the difficult was to like find an analytical focus, because I think I've done that now after I've collected all the data and so on. But if I had had more of this analytical focus, then it would be some more easier to like know what to observe and so on. I think I think the interviews are important because it's easier to analyze like on more detailed level, like how the students talk. Because when I focus on how they present themselves, that means that I look on like, well, are they confident when they talk, or are they insecure? Are they like negative, like implicitly negative or positive towards something? And I think interviews like really helps to capture more like details of their enactment of identity and so on. Yeah, so was it anything or anything?
One question from Jen.
Field students.
So this is, generally thinking about when they're out in doing their field practicum experience, and that's professional?
Okay, I didn't ask them like specific. I didn't observe them like when they were doing their field placement, so I could only I interviewed them when they were doing it. And I also observed them during like seminars when they talked about their field placement. And I don't really know if the field supervisors like address that in an explicit way. But what I can say, I think, is that the like field placement made them a bit more comfortable in handling the uncertainty, I would say. And what I think is quite interesting is that they didn't really like appreciate uncertainty when it had to do with like the academic side of social work, for example, like how to like do an assignment without very clear instructions and so on. But I think it's important to like be able to translate those skills to like being able to work with social work like without having any like clear instructions sometimes. And yeah, so I think, I mean, the way they talked about their field placement, it seems like they like were quite comfortable with handling a lot of uncertain situations, I would say. So I thought that was quite interesting. I don't really know what that, like how I can explain that though, but yeah, I will try to figure it out.
Great, thanks.
I don't have a question, but I would like to just, answer to the first discussion question that you came up with.
Right.
Yes, I think it's about. Yeah, the views on the knowledge, that part was really interesting to me personally, because I have talked to my advisor and like a couple of other professors in social work in South Korea, and they are all saying, and then also the students, the bachelor students, I talked to them, and then what they are all saying is, what I learned from the courses are not really helping me when I'm outside doing my actual practice. And that those were one of the biggest complaints that the school would receive from the students. And I was really surprised to see that it's exactly the same in Sweden. And yeah, it was really interesting. And that's why after the professors received those complaints, they were trying to figure out how to make these curriculum and the courses more, I guess, practical, so that when the students are when they graduate and when they actually go out onto the field, they can utilize what they've learned from the courses and, you know, use that to the clients. But that was, I think they're still working on it, but I think it's a really, really difficult task. And but it is certainly one of the tasks that we really need to work on to make to promote the values of social work, expand the social work practices. Yeah, I just want to add that because I found it very interesting. The narratives that you put up in the slides was exactly the same quote that I got from the bachelor student that I talked to. So yeah.
But I guess I wonder how much of this is just how we are communicating the value of some of these ideas. Like, do we think this is a communication issue of making more explicit the goals and like this assignment is ambiguous because you need to deal with ambiguity? Like, is this a framing issue or is this really a disconnect between what our courses are teaching and what our students need to learn? I mean, how would you sort of think about that question?
If it is a framing.
Framing, or like how we're sort of making explicit the implicit.
Oh yeah, yeah, well, first of all, I don't have so much teaching experiences yet, so I don't really know, but that's just a thing that I have been like thinking on, I guess, like the meaning of uncertainty changes between different situations and some different settings.
But like you sat in on some of these classes yourself,
Yeah.
right? And would you say like what they're learning is irrelevant to what's in the field, or the students are just struggling to connect those two ideas?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it, more like struggling to connect. But then, of course, I think it wasn't always, I mean, I have also like, or I will try to illustrate the knowledge embracement things too. And I guess it also can vary between different social work settings, I guess. But yeah, I think I need to elaborate a bit more.
Yeah, so Mongshuan, you've got a question on how do students talk about how their previous personal experience or interaction with social workers before coming to the social work program impact that social worker's identity or maybe identity formation? Are you seeing any variation on that?
I cannot say it's like so in a very systematic. I cannot draw any like systematic conclusions, I guess. I did ask like in the first interview about their experiences or like if they had any experiences.
Experiences receiving social work services?
Yeah,
or?
yeah. Mostly. And I mean, I think like I don't know, I think it was only like one student I think that talked about a lot about like yeah, she saw like a disconnection, I think, because she had experiences of receiving like welfare from the social services, so on, that she saw like a disconnection, I think, between like I don't know what she was critical against the ideal that some of the students might have had about like what they would be able to do and like what they wanted to do and so on. Yeah, but I don't really know if I can draw any conclusions from it, because yeah, most of them didn't have any experiences with it, so
And were your 8 participants mostly like traditional university age, like 19 to 22, or were any of them older students?
And let's got a couple of older students who are like around that were around 40 maybe, and I think, I mean, and yeah, maybe most of them were around the 22 or 25.
I wonder if that sort of life stage might have a.
Yeah, maybe I think it has some like, yeah, I haven't analyzed it so much depending on their age, of course, but no.
Any other questions from folks online or? Yeah, it's definitely fascinating to see some of the similarities and experiences that we hear from our students in the US and maybe Korea and. So clearly this is an important topic to figure out, that if our students are feeling disconnected or that they're not getting what they need from our social work schools. We've got some work to do as social work educators.
Has anyone done like content analysis of curriculum and student experiences? I'm sure they have, right? I mean, I'm with you, Bethany. I feel like we spend a lot of time talking about theory and knowledge, and we do not do enough performance-based learning in social work. So people are like standing in rooms of nursing home, psychiatric center, in someone's home in child welfare, and they have no idea what to do. And now I'm just using this as my own venue here. Sorry, but like at the nursing school, they practice how to give shots. You know, they talk about
Simulation.
right. They talk about circulation, the circulatory system, but then they give shots. And you don't get many opportunities to give shots here, and then you're just kind of out there, and you know, and then I think what happens is you start to doubt the value of the whole thing.
Well, very engaging conversations and really great to hear about each of your work and the different directions that you're taking it. So thanks so much for sharing with us, and great to connect with our postdocs and visiting scholars. So thanks everybody in our audience for coming along to hear more about their work, and I think that you've got their contact information as well if you want to follow up individually, offer more ideas and suggestions as this work develops. But great to have everybody join today. Thanks so much for making the time, and thanks again to our presenters for creating this engaging opportunity for us.